budget process be discussing departmental revolving funds at the hearing where we hear from those departments. However, there are a few of these revolving funds that are managed by departments come before the city council for a regular budget hearing. And so those are the ones that we've grouped today. So the Law Department, the Mayor's Office of Tourism, and the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture are going to speak to their revolving funds today. So here to do that are Lena Kate Ahern, Assistant Corporation Counsel for the Law Department from the Claims Division. Then Kate Davis, the Director of the Mayor's Office of Tourism, Sports and Entertainment, and Sean O'Connor, who's the Director of Administration and Finance for the Mayor's Office of Tourism, Sports and Entertainment. And then on the arts and culture side, we'll be joined by Chief Cara Elliott Ortega and Naida Faria, who's the Director of Administration and Finance for the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture. So we're very grateful to all of our guests from the administration for coming today. This hearing is starting an hour past when we expected it to because a prior hearing ran long. Before I recognize our first member of the administration to speak, I just want to acknowledge that I've also been joined by my colleagues Anissa Sabi-George and Julia Mejia, both at-large city councilors, along with Councilor Breeden, as mentioned before. So now, without further ado, the first revolving fund that we will take up, and it's the council's task to authorize the maximum amount of money that these revolving funds can hold. That's really our sort of official role in this process. The first one we'll take up is the third-party property damage fund, which is overseen by the Law Department. And so I'll recognize Lena Kate Ahern, who again is the Assistant Corporation Counsel from the Law Department's Claims Division, to speak to this docket.
Thank you. So again, I work in the Claims Division of the Law Department. The Third-Party Property Damages Fund is a revolving fund from which city departments can receive funding for goods and services for repairing or replacing city property that has been damaged by outside parties. So that is what is paid out from the fund. The receipts to the fund are payments on claims that the Law Department has brought against outside parties that we're alleging were negligent in causing some sort of damage to city property. So that can be either a pre-litigation claim or through a lawsuit. The receipts can include both settlement agreement payments as well as court-ordered judgments. And the majority of these payments are paid by insurance companies pursuant to a policy of insurance that would cover that sort of claim.
Great. Thank you. Were those all your remarks?
Yes.
Okay, great. And can you just speak a little bit to, we had a question from Councilor Mejia in our working session about like just what kind of third-party property damage we're typically seeing generate funds for the Law Department for this revolving fund?
Sure. So the majority, I believe, are from motor vehicle accidents, colliding with other city vehicles, or things like street lighting poles, any sort of fixture that's in or near a roadway that could get struck in an accident. Fencing around parks is another type of claim that we'd bring.
Great, thank you. And I know we were also, another question that came up in our overall working session about every revolving fund is just sort of like who decides how the funds in the revolving fund are spent. And especially given the fact that obviously in your case, there's a whole bunch of other city departments that could potentially benefit.
Right. My understanding is that while the Law Department has some involvement, the Budget Office has a bit more involvement in sort of the day-to-day authorization of payments out of the fund. But the general idea is that each department that sort of assists the Law Department in bringing these claims, however much they help bring in, has some relation to how much funding is immediately available to them if they need to cover some sort of cost that's covered by this fund.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. All right, counselors, I'm now going to just see what counselor questions there are. So, Sean, were you going to, no, you're just, okay. Counselor Breeden, do you have any questions on this? Okay, I'll give her a second and see. Counselor Asabi George, do you have any questions?
I do have a quick question. Thank you, everybody, for being here and for your patience while we were in that other meeting over, that hearing over. So there was, in the law department, and again, I walked away from the computer for a quick second, so forgive me if you shared this already. There was an expectation of total expenditures for this year to be $450,000, but the expenditures have only been about 104. Can someone just talk to why that is and what the plans are for that leftover money?
I'm sorry, you were saying that the expected expenditures were 150?
No, 450. So we had a total expenditure expected to be 450,000, but as of the end of March, expenditures had only reached 4,000. And I don't know what the expected use was for the rest of that. That anticipated spending, if that will be used or not, and then it will just, I assume, roll over into next fiscal year.
I don't have that information in front of me now, but I'd be happy to provide it.
Right, just where it's a fairly, to me, a fairly significant amount of money. But that is actually my only, that was my only question. That's from the law department. That's where that funding came from. That's it for me.
Great, thank you so much, Counselor.
Yeah.
Counselor Mejia, do you have any questions on the law department's fund? Okay, seeing.
Wait, can you hear me?
There we are. Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Bach, and members who have joined us today. I guess my only question is going back to the revolving fund, is just making sure that constituents understand the role of the revolving fund. If you could walk us through what that looks like, what's the narrative from the incident damage claim to litigation. I know that's a lot in the weeds, and I know we're already starting behind, but this is just because there are a lot of people who are tuning in, and they're not familiar with this fund and how it works. So can you just entertain us for a quick second and help us understand what this revolving fund looks like and how it looks and how it works? That would be great.
Sure. So there's two pieces to it. In terms of the money that comes in, that's through my office. So there's the claims division, and we bring claims, and we usually send them to insurance companies. And through correspondence with them, we see if we can come to some sort of settlement. We might need to provide documentation showing the amount of damages and what they're for. And then if we're able to get resolution, either deciding on some settlement part way or for the full amount, they would send us a check. If we believe it's a meritorious claim and it's worth pursuing further and we have not received payment, it may be referred over to another attorney to pursue in litigation. And at that point, it would go through the process of litigating and could be settled or proceed to a trial and a possible judgment. And so any figure that we get either in a settlement or in a judgment would be deposited as a receipt into that fund. And then that amount of money is available for departments to use to spend on things such as car accidents. So it's money that I believe is outside of their standard budget. If there's sort of an unexpected event that causes an expensive need for an expensive repair or replacement. And they can apply to the budget office to make sure it's an appropriate expenditure for that fund to cover the costs. And the amount of work that department has done in terms of the amount of receipts that it has brought into the fund has some relationship to how much money is sort of immediately available to them for future needs of their department.
And would there be an opportunity, if any, to utilize some of those funds to perhaps create, and you could tell me, because I'm new in this role, so But I'm just curious, would there be an opportunity to use some of these funds to possibly create like a career explorations a stipend program for young people who are interested in learning about law and potentially doing it in, I mean, just wondering if those funds are just used to cover the accidents, or if there was any revolving funds that you could use to probably help with career explorations for young people.
My understanding is that by law, there are some restrictions on how the money is spent. I can't go into that in detail, but I think there are some limitations on using that for payment of wages, that that's not permitted. And my understanding is that the purpose of the fund is primarily or entirely for property damage, repair, and replacement. So goods and services that serve that purpose.
Okay, great. So thank you for that clarity, because I'm always trying to figure out how we can help support young people in their career explorations, and so that was probably an inappropriate question. But with that, though, going back on the same line of thinking around property repairs, and just wondering whether or not you guys have played a role in terms of which vendors you're using for those repairs.
I believe each department is different. I don't know specifics about which vendors they use. I know some have contracts with certain vendors for certain types of repairs, but if it was something unusual, it might be a per needs basis, but it would be a department specific.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Councilor Breeden, any questions on this front? All right. Seeing none, I think that's all of the council questions for you. I do think it would be great if you could get to Councilor Asabi George and to the chair's office just a little bit of clarification around that question of that large gap, which it seems to be. I mean, right, we got the current fiscal activity through the 31st of March, so the first 3 quarters was sort of 104,000. So it does seem obviously unlikely that it would get up to 450 in the final quarter. But I don't know if that's just less accident activity than anticipated, or what's going on there. So, but great. But thank you so much. I think those are all the questions for you and for the law department. So thanks for appearing today.
Thank you.
And next we'll go to the Office of Tourism, Sports, and see, I'm gonna forget. I'm sorry, you can correct me.
Entertainment.
And entertainment, yes.
Hi, Councilor. This is Kate Davis. I'm the director of the office. Our revolving fund is we get, whenever they rent City Hall Plaza, if the rental is for more than 3 days, we get that revenue. So it doesn't happen all of the time. All of the one-off rentals all go into the general fund. So from year to year, it varies on how many receipts we collect. And because City Hall Plaza is scheduled to go under construction for the next 2 years, we do not anticipate getting any receipts. So the stuff, the anticipated receipts that you see are for things that have already happened this year that we're just owed payment for. But we use all of that revenue to do special events on City Hall Plaza. So like Donna Summer Disco, viewing parties for sporting events, all of those kinds of things are funded through this revolving fund.
Mm-hmm. Great. And so, sorry, did I cut you off?
No, thanks.
So am I right though? Because it says that you're expecting to spend down money that you didn't spend.
Yes.
From last year.
Yes.
Over the course.
So the expenditures are a little bit more than normal because since we don't have City Hall Plaza to use, we're moving all of our events to different venues, Franklin Park, Copley Square. So we anticipating it costing more because we had to upgrade some of our sound systems and staging in order to make all of those events happen outside of City Hall Plaza.
Mm-hmm. And how is, I assume that these numbers haven't kind of factored in the possible cancellation of events due to COVID-19. Is that true?
These numbers
were based before that happened. So, but we already knew we weren't going to be doing any events on City Hall Plaza anyway. We just don't know. Most of our events are taking place later in the summer. So it's like a fluid situation, and we're trying to figure out alternative ways to provide free entertainment for the city. But it's all, we just don't know what events we're going to be able to do and what we're not going to be able to do.
Understood. And I'll just that in terms of where specifically, I know that there's been some issues just in terms of I think there could be better liaising with Trinity Church around the sound system. There was an occasion, a city-sponsored occasion, maybe a year ago, where the sound system was so loud that it caused some damage to a piece of stained glass up there. And I just think checking in with the church about, especially if we use that public space more for amplified events.
We'll definitely do that. We will definitely do that.
So, great. Those are my questions. Councilor Breeden, do you have any questions on the City Hall Plaza revolving fund? All right, seeing none, I'll go again to Councilor Asabi George.
Thank you, Chair Bach, and thank you, Kate. I just think that your events, especially the ones that I've attended a number of them on City Hall Plaza in particular, and they're just really fantastic and really great for our residents across the city. So I hope that we're not gonna eliminate too many of them in this coming year, because I think, or in the summer months, because it's really a wonderful opportunity to bring residents together, and it's obviously a great hit for tourism in our city, wherever those events might happen. I wonder if, with the delay in construction, and we talked a little bit about it in our early hearing today, will we a little bit of what we were thinking about? Will we? Is there an opportunity to have some stuff still happen at City Hall Plaza if City Hall gets delayed because of the construction delay right now?
If there's not construction on the plaza, there's no reason why we couldn't have events there, unless we're not supposed to be having events. But certainly if it gets delayed and it's safe to have those events, then we would do them there.
That's great, because I think it's a great use of that space. Anyway, but that's it for me. Keep up the good work. I know that it's really, and your department and those efforts are a real asset to our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you so much, Councilor Sabi George. Councilor Mejia?
No, I'm all set. I don't have any questions with this particular revolving fund. Thanks.
Thanks. I'll actually just, if I can ask Kate one more question. Actually, it's actually related to something Councilor Mejia said in a prior hearing we had, which is just to your point about in the absence of City Hall Plaza, holding events in other spaces. I think, there's a lot of interest in the question of how do we help showcase like other neighborhoods of the city that are outside of the core that maybe, everybody doesn't kind of make it to necessarily from a tourism perspective. And I wonder if you guys have thought with the
We have thought of that, and we, not using the revolving fund money, but using city funds, we do support free events all throughout every neighborhood. But we have, with talking about moving things like Gospel Fest to Franklin Park, and that we're really making an effort to have free events all across the city.
Great. And now I see Councilor Mejia's hand up. So Councilor Mejia, if you want to weigh in, go for it.
Sorry, I was eating a cracker. So I do have a quick question as a follow-up in regards to creating opportunities. As Councilor Brock was mentioning, I was really intrigued about how do we create opportunities for other neighborhoods to be showcased. And I know a lot of the work we were talking about right now is in the City Hall Plaza, but I'm just curious as to the role that community plays in helping to brainstorm what types of events and activities are going to come out of the city. Just wondering if there is any infrastructure for community
There-
engagement in process. And also, I really would like to uplift the importance of showcasing Boston's diverse neighborhoods. I see, it's not all about the Freedom Trail. There's lots of things happening in Nubian Square and Fields Corner. So I'm just wondering what that would look like, and if this is if you are the appropriate person to answer the question.
Yeah, yes, it's not, we do all of that in our office. It's usually a community that comes to us and wants some help, whether it be a parade or a festival or something. And so we lend them all our sound equipment and our crew whenever we can. We support them financially as well. So almost every parade or festival you see across the city, we are supporting somehow. For a good example would be for kind of a newer event would be BAMS Fest. They came into us, that's in Franklin Park, and we gave them a stage, and we helped set them up with sponsors, and we gave them some funds to help with all other things. And we will do that for anybody. So we try to outsource everything that we have to help other people get their events done.
That's great. That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much. I see we've been joined by Councilor Kim Janey, Council President Kim Janey. President Janey, do you have any questions? We're just we did the Law Department Revolving Fund, and we are now just wrapping up our questions for Kate and Sean, who's also with us, on the Office of Tourism City Hall Plaza Fund, and then we're going to move to the Arts and Culture one. So if you have any questions on this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I may just follow up on Councilor Mejia's last question. I think that's an important one, and I appreciate the response, which sounded like the office is responding to requests, and I wonder if there are ways the office is doing some things proactively, reaching out to diverse communities and really showcasing that, just as a follow-up. And I'm sure these are questions that I can also ask in the next session, if that's more appropriate. Thank you, Madam Chair.
We're reaching out to everybody. It's a difficult time for everybody who has a lot of fundraisers are happening, a lot of festivals. We've been in constant touch with, for example, like the Puerto Rican Festival. We're reaching out to every single person to see how we can help, if we need to help them move dates. There's just a lot of unknowns, but we spend all day reaching out to members of the community across the city to see how we can help them.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great, thanks so much, President Janey. All right, I think those are all our questions on this revolving fund. Thank you to both Kate and Sean for coming.
Thank you, Councilor.
And now we'll move next to one second, to Arts and Culture, but I'm just pulling up my, so why don't we do the Strand Theater first? So Chief Elliot Ortega from Arts and Culture and Nida on her team, if we can speak first to the Strand Theater Fund, that'd be great.
Sure, thank you. And I'll start with the Strand and then pass it off to Nida for talking about the Public Art Revolving Fund. The city owns and manages the Strand Theater in Upham's Corner, and rent from the theater is what goes into the revolving fund and goes back into supporting the operations of the space. So that includes hiring of temporary staff like ushers and technical staff, includes covering cleaning and security, replacement of equipment, and that's basically it. It's pretty straightforward. We think the Strand is a really important part of our arts ecosystem. It's easily one of the most affordable performing art spaces in the city, especially for its size. It's 1,400 seats. And we rent it for everything from community arts events to graduations to large touring shows. There's a sliding scale for renting depending on whether you're a community group or an artist, all the way up to a more commercial production, whether you're using some of the theater or all of the theater. And just a couple of things that I can highlight from the last year to add some texture to that. We've been trying to pursue more active partnerships for shows at the Strand. So we entered into an agreement with Company One Theater for last year. They were supposed to be here this year, but of course we're closed right now. Hopefully they'll come back again next year. They do a summer program. They do a production featuring local playwrights, actors, and artists. So we're really excited about that partnership. They also have a pay what you wish model for their shows. So we're always looking at how things can be more affordable and accessible and also relevant to the local community in Upham's and also the local arts community generally. And we also hosted a show that we would have been doing just a couple of weeks ago called Boston Answering. We started that last year in partnership with Hipstery. This was in response to Boston Calling, and it's a show that features local music, especially local hip hop, and I think is really fulfilling kind of the hopes around the Strand that we can do more showcasing of local talent. So that's what we hope to be doing again soon. We are closed under the gathering restrictions right now, which will affect our revenue for this year.
Great, thank you. And yeah, I guess I had a follow-up on that, which was just that obviously the amount that we're being requested to authorize this year, the 80,000, was significantly less than the 150 from last year. So was that updated post sort of COVID, or was that reflecting something else? Or?
No, it's just reflecting our expenditures from last year. And even last year, it was lower because we were closed last fall for some renovations and putting in an elevator and fixing some accessibility problems. So this will be our second year of the revenue being a little bit lower and the expenditures obviously being lower. So it might be that we come back to you next year requesting an increase if we're back to business as usual.
Mm-hmm. Okay, got it. Councilor Breeden, any questions on this? Just unmute yourself if you have them.
Yeah, I'm fine for now. Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks so much, Councilor. Councilor Estabi George. Councilor Estabi George, any questions? All right, I'm going to skip her for now. Councilor Mejia.
Hi, yes. Good. Just a quick question. Just curious in regards to, this is specifically, Councilor Bach, this is specifically just around the revolving fund, right?
Yeah, for the Strand, exactly.
Okay. So that is the Strand Theater is something that's near and dear to me. I'm from Dorchester. I grew up not too far from it. Just curious in terms of if you have a committee of folks that are helping you decide how those funds get used, and also curious about, there are a lot of smaller performing art groups out there who would probably want to use the space but may not be able to afford it. How does that fund help folks who have less resources than others? Just curious if whether or not that fund is applicable to that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Maybe I'll start with that one. We have always worked really hard to waive as many costs and fees as possible to make sure that everybody can get access to the space. And we recently, before all of this happened with COVID and we had to close down, we were going to be looking at this year to do a pilot program where we make some of those revolving funds available through an application process so that there's a kind of transparent way, that an accessible way for people to apply and explain why they can't afford something and what their show costs, and then we could respond and try to underwrite that. It's not enough money to do that as much as the requests that we get for it, particularly taking into account some of the other costs of the theater, but we wanted to give that a try as a way of kind of standardizing how we do it. So I think that's still something that we hope to do once we're back open. And then I should also add for that, the Boston Cultural Council, which we staff, we updated the guidelines for this latest round of funding to fund specifically small organizations. So that's a part of our network that we communicate with about opportunities, including accessing a Strand. So we take a lot of pride, I think, in that relationship to small organizations that are looking for affordable space and have good relationships there. The other question, in terms of a committee, we have been involved in the Uplands Corner implementation process over the last 2 years, and the Strand is our main way into that. It's the Arts and Innovation District. It's thinking about how the theater really responds to the community and can help be an anchor for equitable development. And so I think our hopes were that through that, we would come out the other side with an advisory group or steering committee that wouldn't just be focused on the revolving fund, but more about the Strand's future overall, and be a part of that process so that there could really be a consistent group of people who were kind of holding that space for the community use of the theater. The working advisory group for that process kind of became that in effect because it had community members on it who have been a part of Upham's Corner Main Streets, who have been Strand staff in the past, who have been really, really involved with the theater. And so that has been kind of the closest thing to an advisory group at this moment. But I think, again, looking to the future and what happens with that process, we would love for there to be a group that's, again, not just looking at the revolving fund, but thinking overall, like, how is the programming being guided? How are we making sure that there's access, and just making sure that there's that community accountability?
Thank you.
Great, thank you. President Janey, any questions on the Strand?
Okay.
No, not on the Strand. I'm just grateful that there's some investment, but thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I guess that would be my one follow-up, Cara, would just be, what is, I mean, my impression, right, at least for a while, we were really seeing sort of underutilization of the Strand, as I recall. And also, obviously, a lot of expense on the city side. What's that picture look like right now?
Yeah, that's been part of the focus of the Upham's Corner implementation process, how to make sure that the Strand is being used as much as it can be, given some of the restrictions on the space. You know, there's only so many ways to use 1,400 seat theater. We had many conversations during the community process about, could you break this up into smaller spaces? Can you use the lobby for different things? And you can do some of that, but it's not enough to have a lot of different activities going on at once. So I feel like we've had a really good conversation about it at a community level. But a whole part of that implementation process was to look for new operating models for the Strand and see who other operating partners could be to make sure we're getting the most out of it. And I think, we don't know what that's going to look like yet, but some ideas could be a mix of other kinds of commercial operators that help underwrite community access to the space. We've talked about working more in partnership and long-term partnerships around workforce development, where young people can get access to training in that space and into theater tech and sound engineering and all of that, and who are people who could bring in resources around those pieces. So it's still pretty high level, but that's the conversation that we've been having through that process, with a lot of good buy-in, I think. A lot of people understanding that there are pros and cons and different models, and that we want the theater to be sustainable, but we also need to make sure that there's space for community access that is underwritten as part of that.
Kenzie, you're muted. Muted yourself.
Thank you, Counselor. Yeah, okay. If there are no further questions, and we'll move on to the other Arts and Culture Revolving Fund, which is the one for public art. And I think Nida was going to take that one.
Yes.
Great.
Good afternoon. So the Public Art Revolving Fund is funded through the Public Improvement Commission, and the revenue comes from the sales of easements. And the role is to support the public art to enhance the public realm throughout the city. This includes plan and mercy conservation, support for temporary art, and some of the highlights that in the last year we had was supporting the Tale of the Asian Vase mural by Brian Bion in Chinatown. We funded a grant to the Chinese Historical Society of New England as part of the Transformative Public Art program. We also had some conservation of the work and artwork by Buzu Muzi Manduna in Roxbury. And this was also, one of our projects with the Dali Library. And we also funded the transportation of the Quest Eternal by Donald DeLu in Austin. This was also funded to relocate the artwork to Smith field.
Great, thank you. And can you speak a little bit just to, I mean, I see there was sort of a larger chunk of money that came into this back in FY19, and then it seems like it's been a more modest. So there was that 150, and then this past year, you know, through March was sort of 50,000. I would assume we aren't selling a lot of easements given the current situation, and then sort of anticipating 60,000 for next year. So I guess, are we back at a normal? Was that an abnormal year in 19 where we got the 150? Do you know?
We don't know because we don't control, you know, the sales of easements. Our last time that we got it, I think was like around October. Yeah. So
how, I guess from a planning perspective, like, do you guys just wake up one day and there's an email from PIC saying, hey, we sold an easement, there's a bunch of additional money now in the revolving fund, or do you tend to kind of know that
Yeah,
money is
I can speak to that. I think when this was originally created, this agreement for this revolving fund, which was some time ago, it was really a placeholder measure for having money for conservation of public art. So it's been difficult to know when exactly money would come in and how much and what's normal. And there's this larger question that we need to address, which is that there isn't a steady, predictable amount of money for public art preservation, conservation, emergency, repair, any of those things. And this is something that we've been talking about for a couple of years now, especially since we launched the Percent for Art program, because we now have dedicated funding for permanent public art, which is amazing. But that funding, the restrictions on that capital funding don't account for day-to-day maintenance and repair. So we're in the process of trying to understand exactly what our costs are there. We received some funding through the budget last year to really have a collections management database and do a full survey of the public art that's in the collection and really have a sense of what those costs are in reality, so that we can work backwards to what a maintenance budget would really look like. So we're still figuring on that. We're making progress on getting that database implemented. It's going to take some time to really do a full assessment.
And what about, has there been any discussion of, obviously, we have of very long maintenance of public art mechanisms in this city, specifically the Brown Fund, right? That where obviously in that case we capitalized, a donor capitalized a fund early on, and then that pays for maintenance of the projects that get funded out of that. And I guess I'm curious about whether the city has thought at all about what we learned from the Brown Fund model, since of course Treasury administers it, should we be thinking about something like that, like capitalizing a permanent maintenance fund? What are the kind of ways that model, which involves checking in on the projects every year ostensibly, sort of what about that works, what about that doesn't? I don't know if you've thought about that.
Yeah, those are great questions. We were really excited last year to have our first public art project manager position in the office, somebody who has a lot of experience doing these kinds of projects. We also have a collections manager, and these are newer resources for us. So I think we have a lot of the expertise in-house for actually managing projects, managing the conservation projects ourselves, as opposed to I think the situation that the Brown Fund is in, where they're more of a grantor as opposed to the direct manager of those projects. So we're a little bit more in the driver's seat there, but I think that the question about, how does a fund get stood up and where does that live? Those are exactly the questions that we're dealing with right now. And it seems like the first step really is understanding what are our true costs. Because it's very unlikely that we'll have enough funding to pay for all of our real costs, but understanding what is an actual management maintenance plan that could be ongoing year after year, that's where we are.
Great. And back to NIDA for a second, you mentioned some great projects that have been funded out of this revolving fund in recent years. Who decides? How does the process of deciding where to dedicate this money happen?
So we usually put a call to artists. This goes through similar to an RFP process.
Okay. So, and it's pretty, but I guess what I'm asking really then is like, do you just say, hey, here's an RFP for, we've got some money for, you know, a public art project, give me all your thoughts? Or is it more like, we have some money for a public art project at this like corner that would, you know, address these issues? Like how specific is our kind of RFPing on this front?
So for these projects, we didn't select the location. The artist came to us with the location and a scope of the work.
Great. Thanks so much. All right, Councillor Breeden, any questions?
Thank you so much. I represent Alston Brighton. We have an artist community out here, and our public art is a great point of pride in our neighbourhood. How does this intersect with? I'm trying to have Alston, part of Alston, designated as an arts district. How does establishing an arts district intersect with your fund, and do you help support public art in that context?
Sure, I can speak to that. We definitely support districts through the temporary projects that are funded through the revolving fund, but that funding is pretty small for temporary projects. So we do work with partners and different relationships. We work with our districts. We're in touch with them really frequently. And if there's a project that comes to light that could use some extra funding over the summer, or a mural project, this might be one way that we would support that. And then there's also the percent for art funding, which is separate from the revolving fund, but is much more funding to do the permanent projects. And that we have more of a hand in because we're directly commissioning those. So that is where we look at, you know, we work with the planning office, we look at districts, we look at, you know, talk to our community partners, understand where there are opportunities for these projects. We look at the capital budget, and we go through a whole step-by-step process of understanding where there are opportunities and where the community, different communities, different neighborhoods want to see a piece of permanent public art. And there's a lot of community engagement that goes into that as well. So I would say both of those are avenues for Alston, Brighton, and specifically a cultural district to receive public art funding from us.
Very good. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Breeden. Councillor Savvy-George.
Oh, sorry. I actually don't have any questions. Thank you very much.
Great. All right, Councillor Mejia.
Yes, I do have one quick question about public art. Just wondering, there's an artist named Pro Black. I'm not sure if you are familiar with him. He does really dope work. Just wondering how his work is helping to inform the city in terms of public art. Are there other spaces and opportunities for artists like him and others to participate in the brainstorming process, if you will, or even kind of helping the city determine what other buildings we may want to include in that art mural work?
Yeah, for sure. We've worked with Pro Black. We've worked with a lot of really amazing muralists and graffiti artists, either because they've directly responded to our calls or because we've gone out and said, we think this would be a really good opportunity for you. And we would love to increase the number of murals we're doing in general. We were able to do that with both of these pots of funding. So I think there's tons of opportunity to work together and think about new spaces, new ways of doing that, making sure we're reaching artists locally, because that's always one of our biggest concerns. Sometimes we have these really great opportunities, big budget public art projects, but local artists might feel like they don't have the experience or it's not for them. And so we're always interested in figuring out how to make sure that people are taking advantage of that, because that's money that should be spent, you know, in our local arts community. So welcome suggestions or connections on how to further that work.
And I'm sorry, Councillor Ball, could I ask another question, or is...
Absolutely, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, and just figuring out in terms of opportunities to engage nonprofit organizations, specifically nonprofits that work with young people, if you guys have looked into ways that you can tap into the youth for opportunities for them to also help you out in that process.
Yeah, we're really interested in that. We have had artists who have responded to our public art calls incorporate youth engagement in a variety of ways. And if there are opportunities to connect a project with a local school or a local nonprofit who wants to bring youth into that process, we're really interested in that. And we try to find those relationships. And then I would say the other area where we think about this is we're always trying to find opportunities that might be, $5,000 opportunities or something that's a little bit smaller, but where we're getting work back that's maybe an image or something that someone's done on the computer, something that's graphic design, or a piece that somebody did in class that they could then scan and send to us, where we then take on the process of actually manufacturing it into whatever the final art product is going to be. And that's another really great way to get work from young people, and they can respond and get a call from the city. They can get one of those commissions that way. And so that helps kind of make that a more accessible opportunity for young people. And we have a piece like that in the bowling building. There was a young artist who scanned her piece, and then we were able to actually print that onto like an acoustical panel. And so there's all sorts of ways that we can help integrate youth artwork into those projects.
And thank you for that. And my last question is around if there's an opportunity for the intersection of working with small businesses and restaurants and creating opportunities for artists to potentially get, utilize their wall space to either produce a piece or maybe sell a piece. I'm just wondering what action may exist from your department to help support artists in that capacity as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. We had started a conversation this past year about how to make sure our cultural districts and our office are working to support Main Streets and helping Main Streets as that infrastructure that's supporting small business bring some of those ideas, maybe even putting together a toolkit or a list of ways to creatively engage with businesses. A lot of businesses we know are doing that already. And if there's anything we can do to support them, we definitely will. I think it'll be interesting once we get out of some of these restrictions around coronavirus. We're already seeing a lot of artists and supporters of artists thinking about creative ways to make sure that people can sell their work. And so maybe that's something that we consider also as we're coming out of this phase of how can we make sure that artists have opportunities to sell and do a little bit of matchmaking there.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you.
Councilor Janey, any questions on
Yes, thank you. And it's great to follow Councilor Mejia again. Thank you for your work as the former chair of the Arts Committee and the former chair of the Small Business Committee. Linking those two is something that I think is really powerful and something that I see happening in my district in terms of local businesses being a platform for local artists. And it's great that your office supports that and really giving a platform for some of our local artists who are maybe less known or whose art is an art genre that is not as recognized or celebrated as some other art forms are. So I'm really grateful to your work. And as president, those issues remain near and dear to my heart. I'm especially interested in, I think, as you know, Chief, in mural preservation. I grew up in Roxbury in the 1970s and 80s. In my neighborhood, I mean, there were just murals everywhere that told the story, not just of our community, of our neighborhood, but really as our history as Black people. And many of those murals are now gone. They're either, those buildings have been torn down or new buildings have gone up and covered those murals. Right now in my district, but also around the corner from where I live, the Roxbury Love Mandela mural, that mural, we're gonna lose that because that building is a city-owned building and that building's getting developed. And, I would love to think of ways that we can use the resources either from this fund or other funds in our city to do much more mural preservation. And I'm wondering if that's something that your office is now focused on, as well as continuing to give opportunity, which I know you're doing more and more as grants become available to local artists and artists who come from diverse communities. I saw in my first term a very hostile environment for some of our artists as they were being kicked out of their spaces. And so all of the support that we can do through these grants, I think, will help strengthen our artist community here. And I'm specifically interested in mural preservation and any of the funds that help support that.
Sure, yeah, I think it's something we're really interested in. We know that there are murals around the city that have had or continue to have a really special place in defining the character of the neighborhood and showing the history of people who have been there. That's incredibly important. So we've actually had many conversations, for example, about recommissioning Roxbury Love somewhere. And I think we're just looking for a wall, actually. So if you can help us find a wall, we want to do that.
I definitely want to help you with that. Yeah. Thank you.
So we're really interested in that. And I think any ideas you have about things that you think need to be, I think, preservation is one piece, and then there's recommissioning, and in a way that's also really powerful because it shows that there's enough support that we're going to bring it back and it's going to be maybe somewhere else and it can still have a life that way. So 100% on Roxbury Love. If someone can provide us a wall, we would love to do that.
Madam Chair, if I may, just to follow up on the recommissioning, there are lots of murals that we may have photographs for that either the buildings have been torn down or they're covered up. Is that also an opportunity? Or I don't know if those photographs have to be of a certain quality, like how we can reproduce those. But if there is a funding source and a commitment to do that, I'm all in. Obviously working with my colleagues on the council, whoever may be interested in such projects. I'm certainly interested in a number of projects in my district. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, I would just say for that, if you have photographs, I think one thing that we would be interested in is making sure just that those are available, that we have maybe online or somewhere a presence of that so that people can revisit it. And then I would say it would be interesting to think about how to recommission those, and also if it's possible to bring in is there a collaboration or an artist who takes inspiration from that? I think all of that we would love to do. So welcome any ideas.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you, President Janey. I do want to acknowledge we were joined by Councillor Ed Flynn. Councillor Flynn, do you have any questions for the Chief about the Public Art Revolving Fund is what we're on right now?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the panelists for being here and for your leadership on this important issue. I had the opportunity to work with the South Boston Health Center in the Youth Ambassadors Program. They do a lot of public art throughout Broadway in South Boston. It's an excellent program, but it's a great way for them, for the youth to come together, especially youth in our public housing developments, but to focus on something that's important to them, and that's the arts and the culture. So those types of programs really help bring a neighborhood together. The second point I wanted to try to make is, we see these beautiful art galleries across our city, and that's great. But what I'm interested in is how do we connect people in the communities of color? How do we connect Asians? I have a large Latinx community, African-American community, public housing community in the South End. How do these great public galleries benefit, kids in the Villa Victoria or the Cathedral public housing? What are we doing for those kids?
Thank you, Councillor. I think specific to the public housing question, we've had some really great conversations recently with BHA, and because percent for art dollars can be spent on city capital projects, there's a lot of opportunity to think about how we build into renovations and other capital projects there. opportunities for young people to be involved in art, to get mentorship from local artists, to be a part of the art making process, to contribute to spaces that are community spaces or act as galleries. So I'm incredibly excited about that line of work, and I think that speaks to what you're bringing up. We have just started the process of thinking through what that could look like. That's a new partnership for us, but really excited about it.
Thank you. And thank you. That's what I'd love to continue to work with your team on, is how we connect, working class kids and kids from low income families and kids from public housing and communities of color. How do we connect them to arts and culture? Boston is the center of the arts capital of New England, but is it really impacting kids that are struggling or kids in need? So that's where my focus is coming from. Also making sure that we reach out to our the Asian community as well, expose them to the arts and the culture. And Chinatown, for example, has a lot of historical significance, and would love to work with you on what opportunities there might be for that community as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We would love to do that. We have a really great relationship with the POW Arts Center in particular, and any way to grow work there is absolutely welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Bach, and I want to say thank you to the panelists for your tremendous work on this important subject. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Councilor Flynn. I see there's a follow-up question for Councilor Mejia. Councilor Mejia?
Yes, thank you, Councilor Bach. I just do have a follow-up to Ed's, Councilor Ed's questioning around creating opportunities for communities. I'm really curious. I know that particularly in communities of color, we see art galleries as something that, is for bougie people, I guess, if you will. It's not something that we go to or we do. So I'm just wondering what opportunities through your department in this fund can we create to make art more accessible to folks, so that we feel like we're connected to that world as well. I know that when on my campaign, we utilized our campaign office as a space for artists to come in and show their work, and to build community, and people were able to come in and showcase. And it was kind of like an art gallery opening, but it wasn't really. But just wondering, what opportunities can we create, or can you all create through this fund or your department to help communities of color recognize the importance of art and our own contributions to art? It's not because we don't believe we're able to go to a gallery. Our kids are very artistic. We're a very expressive community. So just wondering, how can we create spaces for people to tap into the arts?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. And I think the Public Art Revolving Fund aside, just like the work of our office is really about this. It's about what you're raising. And from, we look at the whole ecosystem. There's amazing things happening in every neighborhood that speak to what people there want to see. And so for us, it's how do we support that? And the grants to small organizations is definitely a part of it. Grants directly to artists is a part of it, so that artists can, have their own vision of what that looks like and have funding to do their work. And then also the Opportunity Fund. So this last year, we changed some of the guidelines around the Opportunity Fund, which is a grant opportunity that's open all year long. And it's for individuals who, at first it was just for artists who need some funding to support whatever their work is, whatever that means to them. And then we added a category around events. And so if you're doing an event for your community that's arts related, you can apply for this funding to do that, whether it's to buy supplies, to buy frames, to buy speakers, to rent a space, whatever it is. And that's been really great, not just because we can support those events, but because it helps us see what it is that people actually want for themselves and their communities. And so that's created a whole new set of relationships and a sense of where that work's happening and how we can support it. So we're always looking to do more of that and expand, the City Hall's perspective of what's happening, because there's obviously a lot of grassroots and just organic work going on that's really great, and we want to make sure that funds are getting there.
Okay. I did have a follow-up. Was that okay, Councilor Bach?
We got to give the staff a break, but go.
Okay, all right. Then I'll save it for later. I'll send you an email.
No, just ask it. It's fine. Just be quick.
Oh, okay. So going back to art as I see art as justice too, right? And I'm just curious in terms of your language access and outreach, it's great that you're doing all of this amazing work. I'm just curious in terms of what outlets are you utilizing to disseminate the information so that folks can get it. And I'm just curious about the language access and how culturally competent it looks and feels so that people can access it.
Yeah, I think that's something that we need to improve on generally. We advertise not all of our opportunities, but some of our opportunities in multiple languages. We have tried translating applications, and that gets a little bit harder to figure out, just because then you have to also translate responses that come in other languages, and the whole communication system kind of requires that translation service. So we've been trying things and trying to see what works. I think part of what that's taught us is that if we don't have good direct relationships with the communities we're trying to reach, then having something translated and putting it on the website isn't the same thing, right, as actually having a relationship and a direct connection. So that's what we've been focusing on. We map all of our grants and projects, and we have a standard set of demographics that we ask for in all of the applications, so that we have a sense of what the gaps are and where we need to focus. And then from that, we can prioritize particular neighborhoods or particular populations that we feel like are, we don't have as strong of a connection to, or who aren't aware that they can take advantage of our resources. Or I think mostly the problem is that people feel like it's not for them. And then the other thing that we have tried to do is be really careful about our language. So when we talk about artists, sometimes we hear that people don't feel like they identify as an artist. So how can we talk about creative workers or cultural workers and expand kind of the definition of who qualifies, so that people really see themselves in the material? So that's a little bit of where we are, but it's definitely room for improvement, I think.
Thank you. I yield my time, Councilor Bach. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. No time to yield, but I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us today on behalf of all these revolving funds. I also think, to some of Councilor Mejia's questions there, I mean, we have sent out a request for information to all departments, including arts and culture. We don't have you all coming in for a hearing, although I think that maybe next year, Cara, since I think there's a lot of interest in the council. And I just want to say, both to Cara and Kate, that I, for one, am very aware that in the middle of this emergency right now, and a lot of the departments that the council is hearing from on the day-to-day right now are public health and, public safety cabinet, and OED and D&D. But I think that we all know that when we think about rebuilding and kind of, protecting and supporting our community through this, that both, all do arts and culture, and then also tourism and entertainment is a huge piece of the fabric of recovering from this situation. So I think, be looking forward to more conversation with both of you, and really appreciate all the work that you're doing right now. But thank you so much for joining today. Anyone else have any final comments? I think we're gonna close to give 20 minutes before the next council hearing. Before I gavel it out, I do want to just shout out to the man in the sky here at all city council hearings, is Carrie Jordan, and this is sort of a crazy day for council hearings. So just want to recognize him and the whole team at Central Staff. And again, thank everybody for coming to speak to us on the revolving funds today. So I see no one here in the waiting room for public testimony for this hearing, but again, you can submit that to ccc.wm@boston.gov, or you can go online to the City Council's website and fill out the form there, submit a video. We look forward to hearing from you. And with that, we're adjourning this hearing of the Committee on Ways and Means. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks. Really appreciate you all coming. And again, sorry about the delay in the start.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor.